It's been great. Anyway, good evening for those of you here and those watching by way of live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and so on. Again, this tonight and then next week, which will be the 19th, that'll be the last class on faith in the founding, the Bible, and the Constitution. Again, hopefully it's spurred you enough to start, if you haven't done much on your own on this, that you'll do so, because we have not, hate using the cliche-ish to say we've just scratched the surface, but we've not gotten very far in this at all. Tonight we're going to talk about state sovereignty. This is a major, major confusion with, for those watching and wonder what's going on, it's somebody with a duck call that we all know who that is, who did not turn their phone off. So anyway, tonight, state sovereignty. Major distortion. You got notes. Attack on our republic, deal with the very nature and framework of our governmental structure. That is, the federal government is the ruling entity over the states. I think if we took a poll tonight, you just went out like folks do. We went downtown Cincinnati, put a mic in front of people and said, who's in charge, the central government or the states? 99 9/10 of the people are going to say the federal government. We're just subsidiaries. The states are the federal government. That's not true. It's not true. It is true in the sense of practically now. It's not true in terms of what the framers wanted, though. We'll look at that tonight. And again, just kind of scratch the surface of that. It was not the central government, but the states who were to exercise the most power in our republic. We read that a couple of times. I think it was Madison or Adams that said the federal government should be very well defined and their responsibilities very limited. The states should be the opposite of that. Much expansion for the states and basically not a whole lot of parameters. So for the proper balance, that being determined by the framers, the states need to reclaim their rightful power, the balance that would be achieved by putting the federal government back in its limited and clearly defined role. It was one of, if not maybe the major, certainly one of the huge, huge fears that the founders had, that we would have a massive, encroaching, power-grabbing central government. They feared. I believe if Madison or Jefferson or Franklin or any of the rest of them could see now, I don't think even in their wildest fears they could envision what Washington looks like now. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of agencies, and as I said several weeks ago in this, there are 70 sub-agencies just under the education department. Now tell me we need 70 sub-agents under one agency, that being the education department. Now I'm sure that's not an anomaly. If you went through all the rest of them, you'd probably find all these tentacles going out. Well, we have some, however many million now, federal workers. Anyway, now here's the problem. It's the overall ignorance that quite frankly, most of us, in terms of a miseducation of what we understand about the state's sovereignty over against the federal government. First, the citizens do not understand the nature of the states and their relationship to the federal government. Again, I think we view it as the federal government is the ruler and we're just the understudies, as it were, in terms of states. It was not the original intent of the founders, not even remotely that. And we'll look just at some of that tonight. Second, we do not understand the nature of the Constitution as its relationship to the federal government. Here's what it was in the beginning. About 1 month prior to the Declaration of Independence, on June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee proposed what was to be called the Lee Resolution, three-step process for the states to declare their independence from Great Britain and become sovereign states. The declarations, we have it right here. You'll see the 3 points just as Lee outlined them, and they accepted. Number one, these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. Now, hold on to that thought, because we think states a certain way, not where the framers thought of states. Number two, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the, watch this now, underline that, the state of Great Britain. That's a key understanding to underline, because we'll come back to that in terms of the states. To the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. So that, remember now, this is nearly a month before our July the 4th, 1776, right? Number three, that measures should be immediately taken for procuring the assistance of foreign powers, and a confederation be formed to bond the colonies more closely together. Lee and certainly the framers knew what they were getting ready to undertake, that being to side off against the British on their own, was probably going to be problematic. So remember, they enlist the help of the French, and they're trying to get monies and so on. So here in the third point, they're looked to the need of assistance from outside, and that rather than these 13 colonies trying to do all this separately, there would have to be a confederation that at least grouped them together to help in that process, working with foreign entities to help them in the pushback against the British, and with finances as well. Now, watch this. On July the 2nd, 1776, 12 colonial delegations voted in favor of the Lee Resolution. New York abstained, the state of New York, or the colony of New York. John Adams wrote to Abigail Adams on July 3rd, 1776, and proclaimed, "The second day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable." That word is not spelled incorrectly. If you look at what Adams, the way Adams wrote it, that's the way he wrote it. So don't think that's misspelled. It just means epic. What he said, the second day, not July the 4th. Did I get that? Yeah. July the 2nd. Adams said will be the most memorable, epic day in the history of America. Quote, unquote. Why? Because we don't know that. We don't know that. Let's dig a little deeper. This history is important, though rarely is it taught. Our independence is when? July the 4th. But technically it was not July the 4th, it was July the 2nd. And Adams outlined that. On July 6, 1776, not July 4th, 17, the colonies became independent and free states. Should be like it. It is relevant to recognize there is no, watch this now, there's no mention of the central government. Everybody catch that? And Lee's resolution says nothing about a central government, only the states. The states became free, sovereign entities. Or not just in the Lee Resolution, but also in the Declaration of Independence. That another document that we hold in great revering says nothing about the central government. Isn't that interesting? Are you grasping the fact that our framers had an altogether different viewpoint of what government ought to look like and how it ought to function? It is a matter of historical fact that the states existed prior to the federal government. The federal government did not create the states. They existed as autonomous, sovereign entities before the federal government. The states from the outset were independent, sovereign entities which would go on to be the creators of the federal government, not vice versa. The central government did not create the states created the central government. And again, we all understand now we have as states have essentially given that away. It's almost like the crack dealer that comes and gives you the first two free, right? Yeah. And then it's going to cost you after that. well, they've extended a lot of free stuff or supposedly free stuff to the states, and now we're indebted deeply. So now, here's the question. What's the nature of the states? What does it mean to be a state? Or more importantly, what was it intended to mean from a standpoint of the constitutional system? That's a question we're going to try to answer here in the next few minutes. Sovereign independent states. In our understanding, the word state, I think all of us would, if we, again, you ask us, all of us would say Oregon, Nebraska, Virginia, Florida, New Hampshire, Arizona, and on, right? In other words, these names are merely subdivisions of the nation. Indiana's a subdivision. Kentucky's a subdivision. Ohio's a subdivision. All overseen and controlled by a central government. That's how we view it, right? The states they're not in charge. Washington's in charge. Now we have, our state locales that were I won't say most of the governors haven't been in charge over this whole COVID thing. They've been emperor-like, but they haven't been in charge of much. But they are lesser political entities functioning below the power and authority of the federal government. Now, I'm going to guess that if all of us, probably myself included, when I started doing all this research, we probably have all said, well, I would have hedged on that some, because I know there's states' rights in which are given that we have some understanding of, but not much. If I asked the question, I think largely we would have said yes. The central government is in charge, and the states are subdivisions of the central government, which in practicality now that is accurate. It is not what the framers envisioned, not at all. They feared a massive central controlling government. Listen, they'd lived through that, been there, done that, including a church that was to tell them what you could do, what you couldn't do, what you could preach, what you couldn't preach, what you believe, what you wouldn't believe. They said, we've had enough of both of those. Below the authority and power of the federal government. This is not how the framers, though, thought of states. Look at the last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world, who would that be? God himself. For the vicissitude of our intentions due in name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and what is it again? State of Great Britain. Not the nation of Great Britain, not the country of Great Britain, the state of Great Britain. Everybody getting it? So the bottom line, they then considered themselves states, just like Great Britain, France, Germany. The state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. Notice what's absent there again. What is it? No mention of a central government. None. These colonies, states, they became then free states, in effect, a country with the same sovereignty that Great Britain had. That's how they viewed it. The Declaration of Independence asserts that the colonies, by right, are now free and independent states, but that's not the definition of a state by our current definition. Again, we're the subcategory or subdivisions of this large monstrosity called our federal or central government. It's clear that what the framers believed a state to be by simply looking at the very next clause. What's the next clause? The Declaration refers to Great Britain as a state. Not the country of Great Britain, not the nation of Great Britain, the state of Great Britain. In our framers' mind, that word state was synonymous with Great Britain. It was synonymous with a sovereign government. So the minute the Lee Resolution was agreed upon, July the 2nd, not July the 4th, The minute that that was agreed upon by these colonies on July the 2nd, and subsequently when the actions were published in the Declaration of Independence, our colonies became sovereign governments just like Great Britain. Now, they knew there had to be a confederation. They knew they couldn't hang out on themselves and get everything done that needed to be done, but they in themselves were sovereign entities. By tracking, some of you are still looking at me like this is some new foreign craziness.
It is new.
Well, it's in our Declaration of Independence and the Lee Resolution.
Victoria just doesn't want to let go.
Yeah, yeah. We will rise again. It's also noteworthy to see that there's still no mention of a central government. No mention of a central government. Reading further, there is additional evidence of the sovereign nature of the independent states. Watch now what the Declaration continues to say, and that the free and independent states, they have full power to levy war. Do you know that was in the Declaration of Independence? Indiana would have the free right to levy war. Ask me on the street, could you do that? Yeah. Of course you can't do that. No way you could do that. Yet that's what the Declaration of Independence says. They have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. Again, they're saying right now, whether it's Delaware, whether it's South Carolina, whether it's New York, they have the same authority that Great Britain, France, Germany have to conduct business, engage in war if they decided they'd be crazy enough to do that as a state, but they could do that under this. So the Declaration not only equates each new state with Great Britain in title, but also in power, authority, and responsibility. So not just that they're free sovereign entities, they have power, authority, and responsibility. Still tracking? I know this is new. So here's the principle. The nature of the states is that they are sovereign. Everybody know what sovereign means? Self-sustaining. Sovereign. They're their own. They're not reporting, as it were. Again, what we've read through here, all these statements of the Declaration of Independence, the Lee Resolution, and on, make no mention of a central government. The states created the central government. Now, it's not that the framers didn't believe there needed to be a central entity called the federal government, central government, but that their function would be limited and well-defined. We're going to engage in war. They then said, well, listen, we understand what the Declaration says, but we don't think Delaware probably ought to go to war with Great Britain. Right? That probably should be handled by a central government entity. If we're going to engage in war with some foreign entities, we probably better have a central government to do that. Independent free governments that existed prior to the establishment of the central government. Again, the framers and founders were doing the best they could in terms of what they put together to say, don't you states dare relinquish all this authority, because what will happen is what we've got now. Again, I don't think even in the massive prophetic insight, and understand, these framers, they would have said, they don't count the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as divine things. You know, the men wrote these. But when you read their writings, as we have read many of them, they believe they were carried along by the Lord in what they did. So I fully believe there was great prophetic insight in many of these men. They may not have agreed with that. I don't consider myself a prophet. I'm just a believer in Christ. But they had prophetic insight. But I still don't believe that any of them could have seen this far to see this contraption we have now. So, again, they were free, sovereign, independent, and they existed prior to the establishment of the central government. Now, the purpose of the Constitution is the preamble. Watch this now establishes to preserve the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Essential to this preservation, this keeping of liberty, was the forming of a confederation and a central government that would work on behalf of the states in foreign affairs. So they're saying to the central government, we formed you. You didn't form us. We formed you. Central government didn't form us as states. We formed you. Now, that's completely forgotten as well, too, for the most part. So what we're telling you to do, the framers, is you conduct the foreign affairs. You represent us as a foreign affair emissaries. Trade, commerce, contracts, and so on and so forth, and if need be, to engage in battle with them. According to the third step of the Lee resolution, the states would need to immediately procure the assistance of foreign powers to aid in their efforts to gain independence. Also asserted within that third step, in addition to gaining foreign assistance, my iPad jumped about 18 pages. I'll get there. Also asserted within that third step, in addition to gaining foreign assistance, was an immediate necessity to form a confederation. The confederation was necessary not only in the beginning to ensure the success of the war for independence, but also to maintain their sovereignty after the coming war. So they're engaging, expecting to win this thing, so we're going to need to have a confederation after we also win. But going into debt to foreign nations and inviting foreign troops onto the soil was filled with its own set of potential problems. So with this confederation, they'd be able to work together to pay off the debt. Again, if they're hiring troops, they need finances for the war, they need money to build, etc. Rather than, again, dealing with New York, Delaware, South Carolina, and so on. This confederation would be able to work together to pay off the debt to those foreign countries. It meant safety in numbers. Got to get that? Now, uniting in a confederation, not a consolidation. What would be the difference? Consolidation would have just put them all together and they would have lost their own individual sovereignty. So they didn't have a consolidation, they had a confederation where they came together to say, this confederation will speak for all of us, but we are still sovereign, each one of us. They didn't dissolve their own sovereignty. You understand that? A consolidation would have, you consolidate companies. So they mesh into, here's XYZ firm and ABC firm, and they come together and consolidate stock, all that other stuff that goes along with much of that, and then they become the HLK. But they didn't keep their own sovereignty, right? No, they consolidated. That's not what happened with they had a confederation, not a consolidation. Was very logical and effective way to protect that for which they had sacrificed life, fortune, and sacred honor. They sacrificed life, fortune, and sacred honor. We looked at just a few of those men. Many of these men gave up everything they had. And the vast majority of them are wealthy and many of them gave up everything they had for this idea. That the potential they could lose it all, and as again, Franklin said, if we don't hang together, we will likely all hang by the end of a rope separately. The long-term solution for the preservation of liberty was to create a central government. Its purpose would be to do as a single voice what the states would otherwise have to do individually. So rather than, again, New York, Virginia, South Carolina, all acting on their individual basis, this Confederation says, we'll form you, federal government, central government, to do for us as a group. Again, largely in dealing with foreign aspects. As Madison said, the central government would take care of external objects, war, peace, negotiations, and foreign commerce, rather than dealing with, trying to deal with it all on the individual colonies or states themselves. So it's important to remember at this point, prior to September the 17th, 1787, and the subsequent ratification of our current Constitution then, the central government we now know did not exist. So if somebody tells you, well, no, the federal government's always been the big dog in the fight, controlling everything, dictating everything, creating everything, is just not true historically. Did not exist prior to March 1st, 1781, and the ratification of the Articles of Confederation. There was no central government at all, just 13 independent, sovereign, free states to that point. Now, let me see if I can find something here. This will be risky, but I'm going to try. Okay. Here's what George Washington, in his farewell address, shared his vision for America in regard to the federal government and some of its role. He envisioned a federal government which was to be restrained not only domestically but even on a global scene. He says he must be fair and impartial. We must be fair and impartial in our dealing, not to be blinded by so-called alliances. Here's what he says: excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another cause those whom they actuate to see danger only on one side, and to serve to veil and even second the arts of influence on the other. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little, watch this now, to have with them as little political connection as possible. Washington said that in his farewell address. He said, I'm out of here. I'm back to Virginia. Let me get out of this place. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here, let us stop. Here's what Jefferson said in a letter to Eldridge Gary on January the 26th, 1799, weighs in on the same subject of foreign entanglement. Jefferson said, I am for free commerce with all nations, political connections with none, and little or no diplomatic establishment. Wow. And I am not for linking ourselves by new treaties with the quarrels of Europe, entering that field of slaughter to preserve their balance, or joining in the confederacy of kings to war against the principles of liberty. That's not where we're at today either, is it? We're entangled on a gazillion fronts. Again, was not what our founders wanted. So let's not engage in trying to promote democracy all over the world. I know we feel noble about that. Here's the problem: is it just never works. Never works. I hope we've seen enough in these now 10 weeks to say you can't take this template which largely we're screwing up now. You can't take this template of our Constitution and try to place it somewhere else. The framers believe this only worked, again, as we said in the very early weeks of this, only worked with a righteous, God-fearing people. They designed it that way. So when you try to overlay that template into cultures that don't view it that way, it cannot work. It doesn't work here now without righteous folks doing what righteous folks ought to be doing in every level of our culture and society. And again, in prophetic insight, it seems to be Washington and Jefferson. I'm sure we could find others, but those two I found had that same viewpoint. Stay out of the political fray. Deal with them on commerce if it helps them and helps us. Stay out of the political fray. We should have listened to some of that. No central government, all just 13 independent, sovereign, and free states. The sovereign states ratified the Constitution on behalf of the people. The federal government had no role. That should be no, not not. The federal government had no role in the ratification of the Constitution. None, zero, nada, yet, none. None. They had none. The sovereign states ratified the Constitution. The federal government had no role in the creation or the ratification of the Constitution. None. They had no role. Closing, no, we'd be early. The states came first. The states were and still are sovereign governments. None of that's changed. Now, again, it doesn't, not practically. Practically, it doesn't function. We don't see that functioning. But nothing in terms of what's happened since that was put in place has changed other than our function of states underneath it. By tracking? There were not amendments and ratifications and changes and so on that altered that. The states have just given that up. So, states were and still are sovereign governments. The federal government did not exist at the states' Independence Day. So on July the 2nd, 1776, not July the 4th, the states in the Lee Resolution became independent, sovereign entities of their own. States, like the state of Great Britain. These are essential and foundational truths. All right. Hopefully we helped you some tonight and cleared up some things and didn't confuse you about things as they exist now. Now, how do we get that back? Therein lies the conundrum.
Why then can't we, as states, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, so forth and so on, create state laws that stipulate that our House of Representatives and senators can only serve 2 terms and then they're out? That's what we're in the swamp.
The question for those of you who are watching, why could not we as states, whether it's Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, establish our own, help me again, state rules, that laws that limit terms? It would seem to be there's no reason why we could not and would not be able to do that. It takes the, well, not in terms of the states' rights. There's not enough stomach to do it, I guess I would say.
There should be more stomach to do it on a state basis than there would be on a federal basis.
Well, there should be from that standpoint, yeah. But again, as I've said in this Wednesday night class, and I've said over and over again during this whole COVID thing, once you give it away, it is almost never to return to you. That's the great fear of what we see happening now. Once you relinquish it, it's...
Didn't there used to be term limits?
Well, again, the framers expected this you were going to serve. So, and all they did, they all served, did what they believed for their country, and then they went back to whatever they did. Their farmers, their landowners, their publishers, their whatever. That's how they envisioned it. Now, again, having folks again, no matter whether they're Republican or Democrat, as I said last week or the week before, I have very little trust anymore in longtime politicians on either side of the aisle. They're too entrenched. You've been there 36, 40, 50 years, like the one, yeah, they all become millionaires too, which would have been repulsive to the framers, absolutely repulsive, because they sowed their lives for this and sowed their fortunes in many cases.
Plus the other factor is, even after they decide that they don't want to serve, these representatives all go to K Street in Washington, D.C. and become lobbyists.
All go to K Street and become lobbyists. It's seems to be the normal progression of up the ladder of your track in terms of.
In addition to their retirement.
In addition to the retirement. Yeah. But again, if you have, it's like they gave us the cocaine. Here's the freebies of cocaine. And then you're hooked, and now everything else is going to cost you. So if you want the education dollars, you got to toe the line. And now we're at the point, how do we do it? How do the states do it without that? So just to say we ought to do this. Well, yeah, we ought to do this, but it's going to take the stomach of a lot of folks to say enough's enough. Enough's enough. Okay. Hopefully, though, this has been, we'll probably look a little bit more at the contract that, I just wish I had more time, but we haven't running out. Well, we shall see. We shall see.
She created the campaign, I mean, she had a lot to do with it. And if people read the history on it, I really believe that's going to be very important.
She did what now?
She helped with the campaign. She had a lot to do with it. I read it.
Well, you have to.
Yeah, I know, but she had pushing it.
Yeah, then you don't work. Yeah,
Is this July 6th? Should it be July 7th?
it should be July the 2nd. Yeah, I caught that one, went back through. It should be July 2nd, not July 6th. As soon as I saw that, I thought, that's not right. July 2nd is really the date, not July the 4th.
Where did the fourth thing come from? Like, where did we suddenly come up with the fourth?
Victoria's our anniversary. Just
So, yeah.
But it's wrong, Kathy, it's wrong. You're celebrating wrong. I'm going to fix it for you, Kathy, hang on.
Just they recognized at that point they did signings and so forth, but the Lee resolution, when everything was agreed on, was July the 2nd. When all it gets documented is July the 4th, so that's when we celebrate. The actual happening was July the 2nd.
British just can't give it up.
They can't.
Let it go.
Yeah, let it go.
Let it go.
Let it go. Just
British, that's the problem.
Just do your homework, though. I mean, do your homework. There's all kinds of misinformation, quite frankly, on both sides of the ledger. So, and it does not help us when we argue things that aren't accurate. So you got to be mindful of that. And there'll be always there's crazy stuff constantly. That's just, just is. You can't watch the news, and certainly you can't watch any of the feeds in terms of just watch. I try to tell, when I get something, somebody emails me something, they text me, and I'll go, Yeah, have you verified that? Because sometimes I'll catch something about send some, and they're well-meaning, but I'll have to send back and say, listen, that's not true.
Right.
That's not accurate. So be careful of that. But yeah, always should be doing your homework, judiciously doing your homework.
There's
You got to get that.
There's a lady that, she's a constitutional attorney. If you want to write this down, and you can find her, and she does generally a live podcast on Facebook pretty often. Her name is Krisanne, Krisanne, and last name is Hall, Hall. And she speaks a lot on the Constitution and our rights. So if you want more, this is a good source. And she is a Christian as well. And we found her through Rodney Howard Brown. He's had her speak at their services and speak on our rights as Americans. Then also, if you're going to the encounter, please sign up ASAP. Because we've got to know if we're going to have enough in order to put in all the planning and all of the work that needs to be done. So,
Yeah, we'll close it off on Sunday. I hate to condense it down to such a short period of time, and I hate saying COVID has caused this, but it is what it is. So we didn't know whether we even wrote it off.
Who was that person we were supposed to look up on YouTube? The riot, or they were playing there?
Oh, Feucht. He looks like the guy that sings Graves to Gardens, but it's not him. He's got long hair that many of us would like to have.
Sean, Sean. His last name is Feucht. In fact, they had him on Fox a couple of times in the last few weeks. Feucht, Sean Fitch. You'll recognize him. He has long blonde hair, and it's curly, naturally curly. He just looks like a California guy. That's what he looks
California surfer,
like. Yeah. And they started at the beaches.
Huntington Beach.
They started the beaches, baptizing, having worship, service, preaching, baptizing, and then they went to Portland, I think, first maybe, and then Seattle first, and then Portland, I think, whatever, one or the other. And they just filled up the streets, packed with Christians.
Did you see the march that they're having in September? DC.
They're having a march in DC, okay, prayer march. Okay, that's good. Because, we were, that conference we were supposed to go to up at church, Solid Rock, she was planning one in 2021 because they had all of the women march a year ago, I think it was, up there. So all that canceled at the very beginning of the virus thing.
This is, I know we invariably will say this on every election cycle in terms of presidents, but I don't think it is I know it is not a stretch. This is the most important election of any of our time, period.
Yes, it is.
But we're going to do it honest, we're going to do it.
I know God, well, I shouldn't start to say we know God's in charge. Well, he's not in charge of everything. But God still remains God no matter what happens in November. But saying that and then living under what could be a really, really bad situation. God still reigns in the throne. It just could be real hell for folks that, especially for believers. I can tell you from a religious standpoint, pastoral standpoint, the Obama administration was the most brutal against the church of any in my lifetime, bar none. And listen, I'm old enough to have lived through some, and I'm now having 40 years in ministry. Lived through some just from a standpoint of being in ministry as well too. And may I say, Trump has been the greatest to the church, bar none. Better than Reagan, better, certainly better than Bush. So I know we can't say, well, it's got to be about more than the church and believers, but the Bible says when the righteous are in rule, what happens? It's great joy and peace. If they're not, then something else happens. All right, praise the Lord. Let's pray. Father, thank you, Lord, again, for your word and your truth, and people that are hungry to not just learn it, but learn how to live it out and walk it out, Father. We thank you for that, Lord. May it be a great rest of this week. May we be set up, Lord, divinely set up with divine doors of opportunity that come across our path for the sick, the hurting, the confused, the fearful, and we will minister the life and the love and the very kingdom of the living God to them, Father, for the glory of your Son, Jesus. Amen. See you Sunday, guys.